Have you ever stopped to think about why a seemingly ordinary number, like $10,000, can completely change how some people view their financial lives, while others spend years working without ever feeling like they've made any progress? It seems like just a number, just another milestone, just another goal on a spreadsheet. But what if I told you that, in practice, this number represents something much bigger than just saved money? What you're about to discover might surprise you. Most people believe that saving $10,000 is simply a matter of mathematics. Earn a little more, spend a little less, have discipline, and that's it. But those who have experienced this moment know, when that amount is finally there, sitting there, available, something changes inside. It's not immediate, it doesn't come with fireworks, but it's profound. It's silent. And above all, it's irreversible. Have you ever been through this? Or perhaps you're still trying to get there, feeling that constant tightness in your chest, as if any unforeseen event could ruin everything. Because that's the reality for those who still live depending on their next paycheck. Every decision is made with fear. Every expense is accompanied by guilt. Any problem, a repair, an unexpected layoff, an emergency, becomes a huge threat. It's not a lack of effort. Often, it's not even a lack of income. It's the absence of a safety net, the absence of breathing room, and living like that is exhausting. It's mentally and emotionally exhausting, and little by little, it undermines the person's self-confidence. That's why so many people look at $10,000 and think, that doesn't change anything, or that's still not enough. But if that amount seems too distant or too small for you, that's exactly why it changes everything. It doesn't make you rich. It doesn't solve all your problems, but it changes the game. It changes the place from which you start making decisions. And that makes all the difference when it comes to building wealth and financial freedom. From that point on, money ceases to be merely something that comes in and goes out to pay bills. It begins to represent time, choice, protection, and above all, option. The option to say no, the option to wait, the option not to accept just anything out of desperation. And this change doesn't appear on the bank statement. It appears in behavior, in posture, in the way you react to the world. Stay with me until the end, because understanding that initial shock, that moment when you realize that $10,000 isn't just money, is essential to understanding why some people manage to move forward, while others spend their entire lives running without getting anywhere. From here, the conversation begins to enter territory that almost no one explains. And that's exactly where everything starts to change. And perhaps, as you listen to all this, something inside you is already stirring. Maybe you're thinking about how familiar this tightness is, how this feeling of always being on edge has become routine. Or maybe you've already passed this milestone and are remembering exactly the moment you realized something had changed. Not outside, but inside. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Your story, your perception, your moment. All of this matters more than you imagine. This space isn't just about numbers or cold techniques of personal finance. It's about real people, living with real pressures, trying to build wealth in a world that almost never fully explains the game. When you comment, you're not just talking to me. You're talking to other people who are going through the exact same phase, feeling the same doubts, the same fears, the same hopes. And this exchange creates something powerful, a sense of community, of belonging, of not being alone on this journey. If at any point you thought, that's me, or no one has ever explained it this way, consider liking the video. This helps the content reach more people who also need to hear this conversation. People who still think they're failing, when in reality they've just never had access to the right perspective. And if you feel that this type of reflection helps you see money with more clarity, more awareness, and less anxiety, subscribing to the channel is a way of saying, I want to continue this journey. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Content that doesn't shout easy promises, but builds real understanding. And as we move forward, this conversation gets even deeper, because what comes after that initial shock isn't obvious, it isn't comfortable. And that's exactly where many people get lost without realizing it. There's a curious moment that almost no one describes clearly, because it doesn't appear in graphs, doesn't make headlines, and doesn't attract outside attention. But those who experience it know exactly when it happens. It's the moment when fear begins to lose its power. It doesn't disappear completely, but it stops controlling everything. And this doesn't happen when income doubles, nor when salaries increase. It happens when there's a real, concrete reserve sitting there, creating something few people have, a margin. The true impact of the first $10,000 isn't in the amount itself, but in the silent transformation it brings about in mindset. People start sleeping differently, not because all their problems have disappeared, but because their brains stop operating in constant high alert mode. That constant feeling that any unforeseen event could turn into a disaster begins to weaken. And when fear loses some of its power, something profoundly changes in how decisions are made. Before that, almost every choice is reactive. You accept what comes along because you have to. You endure bad situations because you see no alternative. You say yes to things you wouldn't like simply because you can't say. It's survival mode working at full steam. In this state, the short term rules everything. Tomorrow is a threat, not an opportunity. And this has nothing to do with intelligence or effort. It has to do with a lack of mental space to think beyond the next obstacle. When this reserve emerges, however modest it may seem to those who only look at large numbers, something rare is born. Decision time. You don't need to solve everything now. You can wait, evaluate, compare, think. This interval between the problem and the reaction completely changes the game. That's when better decisions begin to emerge. Not because the person became smarter, but because they escaped the constant urgency. And urgency distorts everything. This is a hidden truth about money that almost never comes up in traditional personal finance conversations. They talk a lot about investing, about profitability, about strategies, but they ignore the psychological impact that underpins it all. Without room for error, any plan becomes mere theory. Without a margin for error, every journey seems too heavy. With room for error, even challenges take on a different dimension. They still exist, but they cease to be absolute threats. The relief that arises at this point is silent. There's no urge to post about it. It doesn't become a status update. It doesn't impress anyone. But inside, a sense of control begins to form. Emotional control. Control over reactions. Control over one's own rhythm. And this influences everything from small daily decisions to larger choices that shape wealth building over time. The person begins to see behind-the-scenes aspects that were previously invisible, perceives patterns, understands pitfalls, and starts asking different questions. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this invisible shift doesn't happen by chance, nor is it guaranteed simply by reaching a specific number. There's a delicate point where many people get lost precisely when they believe that fear no longer rules. And understanding this is fundamental to avoid returning to the same old place without realizing it. Before continuing, if everything that has been said resonates with your reality, comment below. That makes sense to me. There's a point in this round that has no sign, no warning, and no applause. Yet, it completely separates two worlds. It's what I call the shark gate. Not because it's dangerous in itself, but because from that point on, the environment changes, the rules change, and the way of thinking needs to change along with them. Those who don't realize this end up crossing without understanding where they're stepping. Those who understand begin to see a game that was previously invisible. Before that door, almost everything revolves around chasing money, working harder, cutting expenses, making constant sacrifices, putting out fires. The feeling is one of continuous effort with little real progress. Even when there is dedication, all the energy goes into keeping things running. It's a survival phase disguised as normality, and there's no shame in that. It's simply where most people are, without even knowing that there's something beyond. But when you reach the point of having a concrete reserve, something silently changes. $10,000 doesn't make you rich, doesn't change your social status, and doesn't automatically put you on another financial level. What it does is much more subtle and, at the same time, much more powerful. It qualifies you for a different game. A game where decisions begin to weigh more than brute effort, where thinking becomes more valuable than running. After the shark gate, money gradually starts working for you. Not in the magical or quick way that many people sell, but in a strategic way. You gain choice. The choice to wait for the right moment. The choice not to enter into something simply out of anxiety. The choice to analyze risks more clearly. This transformation doesn't happen externally. It happens in your mindset. And that's exactly what differentiates those who accumulate wealth from those who just spend their whole lives churning money around. This is one of the great revelations that is rarely stated directly. People who build wealth over time are not just more disciplined or more intelligent. They think differently because they live in a different context. They operate with margin, with time, and with less urgency. And this scenario begins to take shape precisely here, at this symbolic point that many pass through without realizing the impact. That's why so many people reach that amount and still end up going back. Not because they lost the money immediately, but because they maintained the same mental logic as before. They continue to treat every decision as if they were in constant danger. They continue to confuse movement with progress. The shark door is not a prize, it's a test. It exposes who is prepared to change their behavior and who still carries old patterns, even with new possibilities at hand. The real impact of this moment lies behind the scenes of everyday life, in how you react to opportunities, in the type of conversations that begin to make sense, in the growing discomfort with impulsive decisions. Gradually, a different perception of risk, patience, and building emerges. It's not excitement, it's clarity. And clarity changes everything, even when nothing seems to have changed on the outside. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the shark gate also involves recognizing a silent mistake that causes many people to miss out on this advantage without realizing it, thinking they are safe when, in fact, they are about to be pulled back into the old game. If this idea is starting to resonate with you, leave a comment below. I'm seeing a different game. It is precisely at this point that the journey begins to get dangerous, not due to a lack of money, but due to misplaced overconfidence. Many people cross the shark gate thinking that the hardest part is behind them. The feeling is one of victory, of accumulated relief, of now I can breathe. And breathing is important, yes. The problem is when this relief turns into carelessness. That's when the most common and most silent fall of this whole process occurs. The mistake doesn't begin when the money disappears from the account. It starts earlier, in the mind. The person looks at those $10,000 and, without realizing it, confuses security with permission. Permission to spend more, to raise their standard of living, to alleviate old pent-up frustrations. It's not something rationalized, it's emotional. After so much time in survival mode, the brain wants reward. It wants to prove that all the effort was worthwhile, and that is profoundly human. The trap lies in thinking that now we can relax. This seemingly harmless phrase carries a dangerous hidden truth. Relaxing isn't the problem. The problem is abandoning the structure that allowed us to get to this point. Gradually, decisions begin to be made based on a feeling of security, not on strategy. Small expenses accumulate, fixed commitments increase. The money is still there, but the profit margin begins to shrink. And almost no one notices this happening in real time. Another common misconception is using money as a symbol, not as a tool. Status subtly enters the scene, not necessarily through excessive ostentation, but through external signs of progress, increased comfort, more expensive choices, the need to show, even if only to oneself, that life has now changed. The problem is that status doesn't build structure, it consumes. And when the structure isn't solid, any consumption becomes a risk disguised as an achievement. This is exactly where the sharks appear. Not people, not just miraculous investments, but old patterns, unresolved habits, and decisions made on autopilot. This is where the sharks feed on the unprepared. Not with a direct attack, but with small, invisible bites. By the time the person realizes it, they've already stepped back out the door without understanding how it happened. The money may have taken a while to run out, but the mindset had already been lost long before. The impact of this is profound because it generates frustration and confusion. The person thinks they failed, that they weren't born to move forward, that they always return to the same place. But the truth is more delicate. It wasn't a lack of ability. It was a lack of awareness about this transition. The shark gate demands a real internal change. Whoever enters it carrying the same impulses as before ends up being pulled back by their own behavior. This is one of the most important revelations of this journey. Getting this far doesn't guarantee permanence. Staying requires different choices, made in a colder, more patient, and more strategic way. And this directly clashes with the desire for emotional compensation that arises after years of hardship. Understanding this internal conflict is essential to avoid sabotaging everything without realizing it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is a specific, almost invisible change that separates those who learn from this mistake from those who repeat the cycle several times throughout their lives, believing that the problem is always outside, when in fact it starts inside. If this part of the conversation raised any red flags for you, comment below. I've seen this happen before. When this milestone is finally truly understood, something begins to reorganize itself internally. It's not excitement, it's not euphoria, it's a silent transformation in how you see the world around you. The first $10,000 ceases to be just a number achieved and begins to function as a filter that changes your relationship with risk, with time, and above all, with your own decisions. The impact of this doesn't appear on the outside, but redefines the entire journey. The relationship with risk, for example, ceases to be impulsive. Before, any opportunity seemed too tempting to be calmly analyzed, or too frightening to be considered. With this milestone understood, risk becomes something measurable, comparable, observable. You no longer react solely out of fear of losing or anxiety about winning. There is room to evaluate scenarios, consequences, and probabilities, and this completely changes the quality of the choices you make along the way. Patience also transforms. Not the passive patience of someone who waits because they have no choice, but the active patience of someone who knows that time can work in their favor. When urgency diminishes, you don't need to force movements. You learn to wait for better conditions, to retreat when something doesn't make sense, and to advance when the logic is clear. This change seems simple, but it's one of the most solid foundations for building real wealth. With this, a long-term vision begins to gain ground. The short term ceases to dominate all decisions. You start to see continuity, not just immediate solutions. You understand that small choices repeated over time create much greater results than large, isolated actions. This perception changes the way you look at money, work, consumption, and even opportunities that previously seemed too big or too small. Perhaps one of the most liberating changes is the ability to say no. No to expenses that don't make sense. No to external pressures. No to paths that deviate from what you are building. Saying no ceases to be a painful renunciation and becomes an affirmation of clarity. It's a profound change in mindset because it protects what is being built, even when no one is watching. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding this milestone isn't about settling or thinking the journey is over. On the contrary, it reveals that this is just the first step, a starting point that opens up new layers, new challenges, and new responsibilities. The shark door doesn't lead to a final destination. It leads to a path where every decision weighs more, where every choice has a cumulative impact, and where awareness becomes as important as money itself. When you understand this, you realize that building wealth isn't an isolated event. It's an ongoing process. And this understanding changes how you position yourself in relation to the future, to uncertainties, and to opportunities that haven't even appeared yet. This is where the journey begins to become more demanding, but also more consistent with who you are becoming along the way. If this part of the conversation made you think, leave a comment below. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation has truly resonated with you. It wasn't just about money. It was about mindset, choices, and that quiet feeling of finally understanding the game from the inside. And if this type of content helps you think more clearly, with less noise and more awareness, subscribing to the channel is a simple way to continue walking this path together. The idea here is exactly that, to talk about what almost no one explains, calmly, deeply, and honestly. If you'd like, leave a comment so I know you stayed until the end. You could write something like, "This message was for me," or any word that represents what you felt throughout the video. I read everything, and this exchange helps guide the always future reflections we bring here. If at any point you felt that this content resonated with your reality, liking the video also makes sense. Not as an obligation, but as a sign that this connection happened and that this type of conversation deserves to continue reaching more people. And if you want to delve even deeper into this topic, there's a video right here that perfectly complements this idea. Click on it and continue with me there, because this journey doesn't end here. It just gets clearer with each step.